I mentioned our guest today is no stranger to regular viewers of Wesley Impact. We've got musicians and singers who do an excellent job sharing God's love through music. And from time to time, they come along, and I like to spend time talking to them when possible. Sometimes that's not possible, but when I can, I love it. Well, today we're joined by Matt Doeland. Matt has been singing with us for about 5 years at different times. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Thank you, Keith.
When did your love for music really begin?
My love for music really began ever since as long as I can remember. My parents are musicians, so they would always be playing music. My mum was a piano player and my father was a wonderful vocalist. So there's always music in the house. And it was probably around 7 or 8 years old I got my first guitar and started playing, and have done ever since. I love it.
And was that Christian music, or was there a time when Christian music became special for you?
Yeah, certainly. Growing up, it was always gospel music. My parents were very involved in gospel bands. They had a ministry into the prisons around Victoria with their gospel bands, and they would play and minister in that way, song and also from the Word. And so I'd always been involved in Christian music. I'd help at churches, and then I started writing my own music.
And where does your wife come from?
My wife comes from Tamworth.
There we are. So you couldn't be more at home really with music. Yeah. Have you been involved in other areas of music then, not just singing? Are you involved in producing things or recording?
Yeah, I've worked with some artists, helped to record and produce, and it's always a great honour to get alongside artists and even for them to.
Let me ask you a question that I sometimes ask of Christian performers: what's the distinctive quality of Christian music? What makes music that's Christian special?
Yeah, certainly. I think there's a depth to Christian music that is really important, and there's a message within Christian music that can be life changing. I remember hearing songs about Christian. Hearing stories about Christian songs and how they'd been written, and there's something life changing about Christian music that I think is unique. Yeah.
So in addition to being a Christian who sings, you've also become deeply involved and concerned about assisting and helping others. And some of that came as a result of a trip to Africa, didn't it? Tell us about that.
Correct, yeah. We went on a mission trip to Africa, and I'd not been to Africa. It was the first time I'd been to Africa, and it was challenging, it was confronting, and it was really the catalyst, I think, for a number of changes in my life. To experience what we did over there, we spent the majority of our time in and around Johannesburg, and we did a lot of prison ministry over there as well. And
so spell that out, changes in your life. What did you mean? It was a catalyst for changes. What sort of changes?
I think to start to see the way in which other people live. Some of them are incredibly poor. Some of them are they're living in incredibly difficult, dangerous circumstances. Some of them are very poor, but they also have a joy about them. And I didn't want to take my life for granted as well, experiencing those sorts of experiences that we did. And also seeing within the prisons particularly the way that the truth of the gospel transformed and changed lives, hardened criminals. Some of the guys I spoke to had committed some pretty atrocious crimes and had murdered a number of people. One prisoner that I remember speaking to, and the gospel completely and radically changed his life. That's amazing when you encounter that.
So how did that impact upon your ministry and your music?
I'm probably going to realise that the power of the gospel is like nothing else. And when you're intentional about realising that and starting to step into that and utilising that more and more, I think that's when not only His power can change our lives, but we have the ability to, through God in us, impact other people's lives.
And it's no secret that you and your wife and friends have set up a programs to help people in your community, haven't you?
Yeah, correct. We've set up an organisation particularly dealing with mental health and disability. It's a government accredited organisation, and that's really, it's going incredibly well. And I think for me, seeing needs around mental health and being able to now start to work in that and assist others is incredibly rewarding.
And to do it in a way that's not kind of just benevolent stuff, you know, handing out things to people, but
Correct.
trying to really work alongside people.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I find each person is unique. What works for someone may not work for the other person. And music comes into that, creativity comes into that, around art, and my wife is a professional artist, so she also works in that field as well. But it's also traditional areas like, you know, employment and accommodation. And these are key areas that people need to actually have in their lives to function well.